Many years ago, my wife and I teamed up with some of our good time friends, Alexa Chumley and Harold Chumley. We decided to head down to Bardstown, Kentucky, to the old Pioneer Cemetery and see if anything was going on there. Located right behind Jailer's Inn on 4th Street, Pioneer Cemetery, also known as the Old Jail Cemetery. Looking at the gravestones and chest tombs, you get a feel for the ancient cemetery dating back to the 1700s. It hasn't been used since the 1850s. Pioneer Cemetery is one of the oldest cemeteries located in Bardstown, Kentucky. SIGH did its investigation back in 2005 and found that there is a lot of energy spikes, especially during the twilight hours. Every time our EMF meters would spike, we would take a picture, and every picture taken during a spike would turn out blurry. It's hard to see, but in these two pictures I'm about to show you, you'll see where the camera blurred out. This first picture is the blurry. Now take a look at the second picture. This picture, I've highlighted what looks to be the emblem of a man or a woman or somebody standing there. What do you think? After we finished with the Pioneer Cemetery, we decided to go down to Tennessee, which was the original purpose of this trip. You see, I've always been interested in the Bell Witch, the story of the Bell Witch and its legend, which go way back. I've been studying this since I was a kid. In fact, here's one of the books that I actually got from the Bell Witch Cavern down in Tennessee. Now I want to tell you, once we got there, the people who ran the cavern down there, the Bell Witch Cave, the wife was kind of friendly, but the husband wasn't. When we arrived, we had our equipment on. We had cameras with us, and at first we were told we couldn't take cameras. He said he didn't mind us taking pictures on the inside of the cave, but we could not film the trip to the cave or the trip back. The Bell Witch haunting goes back 200 years. Here is the story from the Bell Witch site by Pat Fitzhugh. In the early 1800s, John Bell moved his family from North Carolina to the Red River Bottomland in Robertson County, Tennessee, settling in on Red River Community, which later became the present-day Adams, Tennessee. Bell purchased some land and a large house for his family. Over the next several years, he acquired more land, increasing his holdings to 328 acres, and cleaned a number of fields for planting. He also became an elder at the Red River Baptist Church. John and his wife, Lucy Bell, had 3 more children after moving to Tennessee. The Bells had a very happy and successful early life at the Red River settlement. One day in 1817, John Bell was inspecting his cornfield when he encountered a strange-looking animal sitting in the middle of the corn row. Shocked by the appearance of this animal, which had the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit, Bell shot several times. The animal vanished. This was the first documented manifestation of the entity. Bell thought nothing more of this incident, at least not until after dinner. That evening, the family began hearing beating sounds on the outside walls of the log home. The mysterious sounds continued with increased frequency and force each night. Bell and his sons often hurried outside to catch the culprit, but always returned empty-handed. In the weeks that followed, the Bell children began waking up frightened, complaining that rats were gnawing at their bedposts. Not long after that, the children began complaining of having their bed covers pulled from them and their pillows tossed onto the floor by an unseen, invisible entity. As time went on, the Bells began hearing faint whispering voices, which were too weak to understand, but sounded like a feeble old woman singing hymns. The encounters escalated, and the Bells' youngest daughter, Betsy Bell, began experiencing brutal encounters with the invisible entity. It would pull her hair and slap her relentlessly, often leaving wells and handprints on her face and body. The disturbances about which John Bell had vowed his family to secret finally escalated to the point that he shared his family trouble with his closest friend and neighbor, James Johnson. Skeptical at first, Johnson and his wife spent the night at the Bells' home. Things began peacefully, but once they retired for the evening, they were subjected to the same terrifying disturbances that the Bells had been experiencing. After their bed covers were yanked off and James was slapped, he sprang up out of bed, exclaiming, "In the name of the Lord, who are you, and what do you want?" The entity did not respond. The rest of the night was peaceful. The next morning, Mr. Johnson explained to the Bells that the culprit was likely an evil spirit, the kind that the Bible talks about. The entity's voice strengthened over time and became loud and unmistakable. It sang hymns, quoted scripture, carried on intelligent conversation, and once even quoted, word for word, 2 sermons that were preached at the same time on the same day, 13 miles apart. Word of the supernatural phenomenon soon spread outside the settlement, even to Nashville, where then Major General Andrew Jackson became interested in the so-called Bell Witch. The original structure of the Bell house, John Bell's house, doesn't exist anymore. It is an area that's down by the cave, but we weren't allowed to visit the location because it was owned by a different owner. And it was fenced in. We couldn't get in to see it. However, though, we did mill around the area and we seen some of the tombstones of the Bell family. And that was pretty interesting. But our trip to the cave itself, it was just a cave. We only had one thing that happened inside the cave when we were back in the closest areas of the cave. Alexa, she got to feeling very, very antsy. She said she couldn't breathe and she had to get out of the cave. That was the only weird thing that really happened to us down there. But it's still an interesting trip. John Bell Jr., along with his brothers Drury Bell and Jesse Bell, had fought under General Jackson in the Battle of New Orleans. A few years later, in 1819, Jackson heard about the disturbances at the Bell home and decided to pay it a visit and investigate. As Jackson's entourage, consisting of several men, well-groomed horses, and a large wagon, approached the Bell property, the wagon jolted to a sudden stop. It had become stuck in the middle of a creek bed, and the horses were unable to pull it. At least that's what the men thought. After several minutes of cursing and trying to coax the horses into pulling the wagon, Jackson proclaimed, "By the Eternal, boys, that must be the Bell Witch." Then suddenly, a disembodied woman's voice told Jackson that they could proceed and that she would see them again later that evening. They were then able to proceed across the property, up to the lane, and to the Bell home. That evening, Jackson told old war stories while he encouraged set up their tents in John and Lucy Bell's yard. One of the men claimed to be a witch tamer. After several uneventful hours, he pulled out a shiny pistol and proclaimed that its silver bullets would kill any evil spirit that it came into contact with. He went on to say that the reason nothing had happened to them was because whatever had been haunting the Bells was scared of his silver bullet. Now terrified, Jackson's men begged to leave the Bell farm. Jackson insisted on staying. He wanted to know who the other fraud was. The men eventually went outside to sleep in tents, while continuously begging Jackson to leave. What happened next is not clear, but Jackson and his entourage were spotted in nearby Springfield early the next morning, going back to Nashville. Some allege that Jackson later proclaimed, "I would rather fight the British at New Orleans than fight the Bell Witch." The disturbances decreased after Betsy and Joshua's engagement ended, but the entity continued to express disdain for John Bell, relentlessly vowing to kill him. Bell had been experiencing episodes of twitching in his face and difficulty swallowing for almost a year, and the malady grew worse with time. By the fall of 1820, his declining health had confined him to the house, where the malicious entity continuously removed his shoes when he tried to walk and slapped his face. When he recovered from his numerous seizures, her shrill voice was heard all over the farm, cursing and chastising Old Jack Bell, the nickname she had given him. John Bell breathed his last breath on the morning of December the 20th, 1820, after slipping into a coma a day earlier. Immediately after his death, his family found a vial of strange black liquid in the cupboard. John Jr. sprinkled 2 drops on the cat's tongue. The cat jumped up into the air, rolled over in midair, and was dead when it hit the floor. The entity then exclaimed, "I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, which fixed him." John Jr. tossed the mysterious vial into the fireplace. It burst into a bright blue flame and shot up the chimney. John Bell's funeral was one of the largest ever held in Robertson County, Tennessee. People attended from miles away, and 3 preachers, 2 Methodists and 1 Baptist, eulogized him. As the crowd of the mourners began leaving the graveyard, the Bell Witch entity laughed and sang a song about a bottle of brandy. Her favorite singing didn't stop until the last mourner had left the graveyard. The entity's presence was almost non-existent after John Bell's demise, as though it had fulfilled its purpose. The story of the Bells goes back many, many years. And like any other story, I mean, it's an interesting story, but there is so many things that have changed through the years, depending on which book you read. I mean, there's been several books written about the Bell Witch haunting, and most of them sort of follow the same story, but they add their own twist to it. And stories about the Bell Witch, I mean, since it's been made into movies and such like that, it's like the story itself's got a curse. I mean, and I've kind of witnessed that in filming this little documentary about it. I mean, we've had computer crashes, you name it. Anything can happen in telling the story. But an interesting thing about the Bell Witch is also centered around controversy. I mean, such as the Bellwood Cemetery, where they claim that all the Bells are buried at. Well, they've got Betsy Bell's tombstone there, but Betsy Bell married Mr. Powell, And Betsy Powell, who is Betsy Bell, is not buried in that cemetery. She's actually buried in Mississippi. And some of the other stories that come from that long list of the Bell Witch, some of them just don't match up at all. So I guess the take on this story is, what exactly do you believe? I know I find the story interesting. I do think that the main things in the story probably did take place. But there's also the story about General Jackson going down there and investigating the Bell Farm. Well, there's no handwritten instance of him ever doing that. This is all hearsay. So, what's your take on Bell Witch? I know myself, I'm extremely happy that I'm done with this video, even though I still love the story of the Bell Witch and find it interesting. But this has been one hard video to do. And we're getting ready to go on to my next trip with the story of SIGH, and that's with Waverly Hills Cemetery.